So hi everyone, my name's Sarah. I work with the Merri Creek Management Committee. I'll be moderating today and helping you guys ask any questions that come up along the way. So how we'll be doing that today is through the chat function. So yeah, if you have any questions, just as soon as you have them, pop them in the chat or any technical difficulties. And I'll try and ask Sophie and Dom who are out at the grassland, or we can save the questions till the end, however that works out. And then probably at the end, I'll open it up so we can ask any questions. But yeah, don't be shy. We love questions, so that'll be great. Cool. And great. So we are doing a tour of the Ngarri-Djarrang grassland today. But first, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country that we're meeting on today. Ngarri-Djarrang is Wurundjeri country. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and any First Nations people that might be listening today. And happy NAIDOC week, everyone. This year's theme is always was, always will be. And I think that's a pretty important thing to think about today. The Wurundjeri people have been looking after the grasslands around Melbourne for many, many thousands of years and have really shaped these grasslands. And I'd like to say thank you for all the work that they've done caring for the country for many thousands of years and continuing to care for this country and into the future with still having strong cultural ties to the grasslands. So we're also very lucky Ngarri-Djarrang has been given a Woiwurrung name. Excuse me. So Ngarri-Djarrang means thigh in the Woiwurrung language, which is the language of the Wurundjeri people. It was named by an elder, Doreen Garvan-Wandin, back in 2006. So it's very special to have this Woiwurrung name. And I've just got a map up just for context so you guys can see where Ngarri-Djarrang is. It's actually misnamed on this map here, so I've just put a yellow circle around it. So we're just south of Marnie's Road in Reservoir. So it's quite an urban grassland, but it's a really special place. And I've just got a few photos here just for context when Sophie and Dom are explaining things. You guys can refer back to these. So we do ecological burns out at these grasslands. That's the photo in the bottom left there. The middle photo is a photo of Annie Alice. She's a Wurundjeri elder. She's holding a Merrnong there from a few years ago, doing some Merrnong plantings. And then we've got an image on the right of some volunteers hunting for some weeds in the grassland. Yeah, so this grant, I'd like to say thank you to the Darebin Council. They gave us funding, gave the Friends of the Merri Creek funding for this grant through the Darebin Council Communities Grant. So thanks very much to them. And thank you to Friends of Merri Creek for getting us to organise today's event. For those of you who don't know, Friends of Merri Creek have been working since 1988 to protect the Merri Creek through advocacy and volunteer works. And yeah, the work that they've done has been phenomenal. So I highly recommend if you're not part of Friends of Merri Creek already to get involved. And as I was saying, I work for Merri Creek Management Committee, which began a year later in 1989. And we also do much similar work to Friends of Merri Creek in a professional capacity, restoring and enhancing the creek's ecological and cultural significance. So myself, Sophie and Dom all we're in the ecological restoration team. So we look after a few of the grasslands, maintaining the sites and removing weeds and doing plantings and things like that, all to try and promote the biodiversity in the area. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Sophie and Dom.
Hey everybody, just making sure, Sarah, can you hear us?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Hi everybody, I'm Dom. I'm on the ecological restoration team, as Sarah mentioned, and we're joined by Sophie as well behind the camera. We're here at Ngarri-Djarrang out in Northern Reservoir, and we're going to be taking you on a tour of the grassland. it's pretty difficult to kind of show the size of the grassland, but we'll try and do a little kind of 360 hopefully. So I'm not sure of how many hectares it is, but it's actually bordered, how many hectares?
9, I think.
9 hectares. So it's bordered basically on every side by houses. And that's something that we really want to keep in mind today is the actual size of the grasslands relative to the development that's happening around them. So we're in the northern block of Ngarri now, and the southern block is over there. Just before moving on, I'd also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land, as Sarah mentioned. It's really important that we keep that in mind, especially in the context of what is Australia's most threatened ecosystem, which is the natural temperate grasslands of the Victorian volcanic plain. So these cultural landscapes were managed by Indigenous people through fire, through tilling, for thousands of years, and they were used for material, they were used for food, they were used for cultural practices, and it's really, really significant that we walk on this really special country and that we manage it today. For many, many years, grasslands have either been unknown or unknown quantities, poorly managed, and now we're really going on a new path forward with Indigenous people, with people working in bushland regeneration, and of course volunteers and people like yourselves who are really interested. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And I'd also like to pay my respects to any elders past, present or emerging, or any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that are present. So Ngarri-Djarrang, as Sarah mentioned, is called Mother's Thigh in Woiwurrung. It's part of a larger network of grasslands that spread throughout Melbourne's north called the Maribyrnong Parklands, and they all have Woiwurrung names, and they're different parts of the body of the mother. So before that, it was known as Central Creek grasslands. We're actually bordered by Central Creek, which is very small. It just runs from the north all the way down to the south, and then joins the Merri Creek in Faulkner, next to another grassland actually called Maribyrnong. The grassland itself, just before going into actually how the grassland was never cleared, it's worth mentioning the severe threat that grasslands are under and the situation of how they basically became so threatened. So grasslands, of course, are very high in nutrients. They're very open. There's not many trees. And so once a European invasion happened in Victoria, they were immediately pounced on for good quality agricultural land, both for hooved animals such as cows, sheep grazing, and also for agriculture as well. So the Victorian volcanic plain that this grassland is a part of spreads from Melbourne. So we're almost at the tip of it here in Melbourne, all the way out southwest through north of Geelong, Werribee, across into around the Corangamite Lakes in the centre of Victoria, and then all the way actually to the South Australian border. So it was once an enormous land, the land of sweeping plains as we know it. And unfortunately, the reality is after that clearing, after that destruction for development, for housing, for agriculture, they actually now stand at 1% of their original extent, which is remarkable. If we were to think of, say, the mountain ash ranges in the Dandenongs or in the Yarra Ranges, imagine if that was cleared to 1% in properties as big as this. It would be remarkable. And that is, of course, one thing that we struggle with is actually trying to show people that an open grassland like this without any actual trees is really, really a significant land. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. So that development happened well up until about, 30 years ago, maybe, that they were protected. Mm-hmm. They're now protected under federal legislation, so the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Control Act. Unfortunately, it's not strong enough. That's what a lot of people in the environmental sphere will tell you. And their destruction still happens today. So this grassland itself was protected because it was part of what was called the Merri Freeway project. So for those of you in Melbourne, you might be familiar with the Maribyrnong River or the Moonee Ponds Creek in the west of Melbourne. They've been heavily developed. The creek has been destroyed. It's been concreted. Freeways have been put in. And that was actually the original plan, was all the way through the Merri corridor, a freeway was going to be built, which was why it was actually never completely developed. So fortunately, this huge property here was protected. And it was only in maybe the 70s, 80s and 90s that a lot of ecological research actually began to happen into looking actually in the floristic and the fauna properties of grasslands. Indigenous people will tell you that in both artwork, in written works, and of course the all-important spoken language, that grasslands have been incredibly significant to Indigenous people for thousands of years. However, that was completely ignored, of course, for the rapid development of infrastructure, housing, freeways, etc. So that development happened well up into the 90s, and fortunately the Friends of Merri Creek, through a 10-year campaign which was just absolutely remarkable, they were joined by the likes of Bob Brown and a number of other environmental activists in protecting the grassland. They managed to secure it and stop it well after the actual Merri Freeway project was cancelled. However, the Ngarri-Djarrang as a grassland used to be way bigger than it actually was. So all these houses, these, what I guess you could loosely term McMansions, were only developed probably in about the last 20 to 30 years. Before that, the grassland was enormous, spreading both to the east and west and north. And it's actually funny, down the road on Davidson Street, which is the main road you see running through the center of the grassland, if you go a little bit further down, there's still a vacant block that was never developed, and somebody's obviously sitting on it. And little do they know, they actually have Australia's most threatened ecosystem still remaining on their block, uncleared. There's a really large tract of Themata triandra, or kangaroo grass, which Sophie will be talking about later. So that's a little brief history of the grasslands. Basically, they were handed over to Darebin Council, I believe in 2003, for management. And MCMC, to my knowledge, has been managing it for about 20 years. So that includes weed control, planting, fire, clearing a lot of dumped rubbish and etc. Because, of course, this grassland was treated like a vacant lot for many, many decades. So hopefully you can see this. A good example of this is over in the northeast of the grassland. Hopefully you can zoom in and see that. There's actually some really large mounds, just these large mounds of soil, and those were actually used for driving golf balls. So for many years, people would just come here and hit golf balls without actually having a lot of respect of what the actual grassland meant, both for people and for plants and animals as well. All right, I'm waffling on a bit, Soph, I think I might hand over to you. Soph's going to be talking about some of the ecology of grasslands, so both the history of the volcanic plain, fire, wildflowers, and I just might mention that if anybody has any questions, please type them in the chat. We're happy to answer them.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Sophie. Thank you so much for tuning in and participating in today's webinar and Ngarri Spring Tour. I really hope that you enjoy it and find it interesting. So that was, really great, Dom. I think there's a lot of, especially colonial historical context that has really shaped the landscape that we are in here at Ngarri. And Ngarri is actually one of only two remnant grasslands in the urban areas of the Merri Creek. So it's really incredibly special, and there's a whole host of really wonderful plants here. So we're going to check some of those out at the moment. Hopefully I'm not actually squashing anything here. And so Don was talking about land of sweeping plains and natural temperate grasslands of the Victorian volcanic plains. So the vegetation community that Ngarri is part of is plains grassland. So these grasslands are on, you've had a really good look around the landscape, the plains, they're generally these flat, gently undulating areas. These plains were formed through volcanic activity, which I think was maybe 4.5 million as recently as 10,000.
It's very recent. It's very recent geological activity, especially in the terms of Australia.
Yeah. And so the plains where we find these grasslands have come about from broad shields and lava flows that have come through the landscape and deposited basalt. And then the basalt has experienced really long periods of weathering, and you get these really, which maybe you can see here, really grey, thick, heavy basalt clays. That's a really huge feature of the grasslands along the Merri. They're prone to being waterlogged in winter, which they have poor drainage, but they're also fertile. And they provide a range of interesting habitat when they're waterlogged. In more southern parts of the grassland, I've heard some common eastern froglets calling in there during winter, which is really lovely. And they also, if you can see here, there's some tiny little cracks starting to form. And these cracks also provide habitat and refuge for small reptiles like lizards and skinks, and also different sorts of invertebrates. So grasslands are dominated by native grasses, and try and find a good example of the grass that I'm looking for here, which is kangaroo grass, or Themata triandra. So once you get your eye in with it, I think it's pretty unmistakable. If you look down here, it's a tussock forming grass. So all of the foliage radiates from this central basal point. The colours of the leaves, they're really cool. They change at different times of the year. I found the colours. I don't know if you find that as well, Dom.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at the moment, this is sort of really quite fresh new growth because they do grow actively during the summer months. And it gets, this really beautiful green colour. Sometimes in winter, you'll see it with these sort of pastel pink and blue colours. So I don't know, I just think it's really beautiful grass. And if we move up the plant, it's also got these quite red sort of rusty coloured seed heads. And this really unmistakable seed and flower head. If you can see there, it's got these 4 pointy horns that are sticking out. So Themata, or kangaroo grass, is also an Aboriginal food plant and would have been before colonisation, widely harvested, and the grains would have been stored and processed to eat.
I just mentioned as a side note, if anybody's familiar with the work of Bruce Pascoe, who wrote Dark Emu, there's been a lot of research on using kangaroo grass now as a native flour, like to ground up. So I highly recommend checking that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And within the plains grasslands, we also have a range of other different sorts of grasses that exist here, although kangaroo grass is generally considered to be the dominant one. So over here we have a type of speargrass. It's an ostrastipa. I don't know what species it is. Dom,
I think it's Bigeniculata. It's got twice bent speargrass, I think.
Oh, yeah. If you can see down here, it's sort of got these really fuzzy nodes and this sort of slightly bent join between them. And speargrasses, they have these really beautiful open flower and seed heads that, when you get I guess sort of the right light and wind, they kind of tend to glisten, which I don't know, it's really beautiful. Now,
and do you want to mention where snipers occur on the grassland?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So kangaroo grass prefers to occupy slightly moister areas, and speargrasses will tolerate dry conditions and shallower soils. So you tend to find them quite often on stony knolls, which is where Dom and I think, are going to head to now.
Yeah, that's true.
And check out some plants over there. I'm not particularly good at talking and walking at the same time, so I think we might just observe the scenery.
Yeah.
See what else we can find around.
So while we're walking through, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them. We'll hopefully point some interesting things along the way. And we're about to head into a large copse of blackwood, which is a species of wattle, and it's really good sort of like protected area for the mob of kangaroos that live here. So hopefully we can see the roos today. So I think this would probably be a good example, isn't it, of that difference between where the ostrastipa ends, isn't it, in between here and there. So like, I think on the left hand side here,
You can really quite clearly see the difference. There's the heads of the speargrass. Might be a little bit of some speargrass as well. And then if you sort of head over to this area, you can see that there's a lot more kangaroo grass seed heads. And also this, which is common tussock grass, or it's a type of poa, which definitely prefers to grow in more moist areas.
So I think we can also see here on the left, hopefully if we can see that, maybe so if you can see that as well. On the left-hand side of the image, you can see all the heads of the speargrass. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that there's far less. And although we put in a fire break here where we brush cut down the grass, you can kind of still see that even in that topography of the land, the water tends to move downwards and drain away, favouring the speargrass over the kangaroo grass.
Hey guys, can I jump in? I've just got a question. I think you might be about to talk about it at your next point, but Patrick's just asking about how often do we burn and what time of year. So I'm not sure if you wanted to save that one for a bit later, but.
Yeah, I'll mention it. Hi, Dad. That's my dad, Patrick. We do burn. We don't burn every year. So grasslands tend to be pretty cyclical. Research shows that fires naturally happened across the landscape between every 4 to 5 years. So if we were to burn the grassland every year, unfortunately, not only would there not be enough dead growth on the grass tussocks to actually burn, but it would also reduce the competitive fitness of the grass to produce flower heads and seeds to produce new generations. So we don't burn every year. It actually varies. And there's a number of tests that ecologists can actually do to test the thickness of the grassland. So what's sward, which is how much actual grass is present. Grasses can tend to be to overgrow, especially kangaroo grass. So that dead growth will remain on the plant, and if it continues to grow and there's enough dead growth there, it will start to smother itself. And that's when you get that intertussock spacing that Soph was mentioning. It reduces in size, there's less size between the tussocks, and so you see a reduction in plant biodiversity. So, Sarah, you might even be able to ask that. How frequently do we burn Ngarri? We actually do it every year in a museum.
Yeah, so we do burn every year, but we're burning different sections every year. So where Dom and Sophie are standing at the moment in the stony kind of knolly woodland, this section we only burn once every 5 years. It doesn't need as much burning as the grassland areas. But yeah, out in the open grassy plains, we have it on a 3-year rotation. So it should get burnt every 3 years.
So speaking of intertussock spaces, and I guess other plants that you find in grasslands.
Oh, sorry. Can you get a little bit closer to Sophie for the?
Yep,
thanks.
sorry.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah, that should be good.
So yeah, these intertussock spaces, they are really important because not only are grasslands in terms of plants that they're home to are native grasses, there's also a lot of native herbs and forbs. So native forbs would be considered things like native lilies and orchids. And if you come down here and have a look, I think, yeah, this is a really cool example. You'll see just growing in the intertussock spaces here. We've got Trichorhini elatior, which is yellow rush lily, I believe. This is a really beautiful plant that you'll see flowering in Ngarri in spring. It does also continue flowering into the warmer months, sort of in summer, which is really nice. Yeah, so that's a really lovely plant that is around here.
Yeah, hopefully we can find, there's a few more sort of daisies and other stuff over here as well. Hopefully we can find some chocolate ones. Yeah. So we're just heading just through this stony knoll that I can assure you is very stony, but the grasses are so high it's very, very difficult to see. We'll try and find some chocolate lilies, which are really, really nice, as their name suggests, smelling lily. They smell like chocolate, the flowers. And hopefully you can see just over there in the distance are some of the roos. So there's a large mob of roos here. They're ducked down behind the grass a bit, but
we can just see their ears.
You can just see the ears. Okay. Well, there's about 6 or 7 there. I think they're a mob of about 20. So they moved. My understanding is that they moved into the grassland actually relatively recently, and that was through the right burning regime, the right weed control regime. So actually proper management practices of the grassland to encourage them back. So they now call it home, and I think it's a really special part of the grassland, isn't it? Like that we can have roos returning to the landscape.
Absolutely. I think it is something that's quite rare because Ngarri is very disconnected from all of the other open space that exists in Reservoir and Merri Creek. So yeah, it's really special.
Yeah, as Soph mentioned, the disconnect there is probably the most important thing to mention. So the housing development around here, as they were sold off, further disconnected it from other grasslands, from the Merri Creek as a corridor, and that both reduced the genetic fitness of a lot of the plants here and in other grasslands as well, because they can't easily share their genetics outside of the grassland. The same goes for, of course, invertebrates, insects, butterflies, and then everything up to mammals like the roos as well. So yeah, I highly recommend if anybody does want to see kangaroos in metropolitan Melbourne, not too far really from Brunswick and Northgate or whatever, this is probably the closest population. Yeah, it's very special. All right, so we'll keep walking down here.
Can I just jump in with another question? Someone's just asking, they thought the Trichorhini was very beautiful, which it is. But will there be many flowers that will be going through summer?
Into, I think about February.
February,
I've definitely seen them flowering. Once a lot of the other spring flowering lilies, have finished and set seeds. So
yes. I think there's through summer tends to be in grasslands an extremely dry and kind of exposed environment. There's not really much rain. Well, that might be different this year. However, oftentimes it's very long and dry. It's very exposed. The winds are very high, and that can really affect a lot of plants flowering, because not only will they not have the insect pollinators present to help them flower, but it's also a time where all the wind and the lack of rain can really affect the actual flowers. They can dry out. So that's why we tend to see now, or in September, even August, a lot of the flowers coming up, because they've had that winter rain, they've got it in their roots, and it's the best chance to really get the flower out and seeding. So hopefully we can actually find some other plants here that will be flowering over the next few months. Some daisies will. There's Chrysocephalum, which are both lemon beauty heads and milky beauty heads. Hopefully, Sarah, if you want to type that in the chat, people can look them up. My understanding is lemon beauty heads definitely flower throughout summer. We also might find, this is the best chance to talk about this. We've got here a very, very special plant. So this is a critically endangered lily. Do you want to take people through this one? Yeah.
All right. Just peel away some of the stuff here. And we have here matted flax lily, or Nastella Nissiana. It's in the lily family as well. It has thick, fibrous, rhizomatous roots. So that means that above ground it grows in these sort of tufted patches. And if you can see here, the leaves are green, blue-grey colour.
Sorry if that's hard to see, everybody. As you can see, there's a lot of plants around here, a lot of grasses intermixed.
And it is also a very small plant. Like a lot of things in grasslands, a lot of it happens below your knees. But if you can see here, it's sort of got this little midrib along the back of it. I'm not sure if we'll be able to zoom in, but on the edges of the leaves, it's got these irregular teeth on it. And if you move up the plant, it's got these beautiful, vibrant, violet-coloured flowers.
Yeah, it's very difficult
these
to
yellow
see
anthers.
It's really difficult to see on camera how bright they really are, but they're beautiful sort of yellow stamens, so the male parts of the flower at the end. These really nice orange sort of mid parts, and then these great purple petals and sepals.
Flax lily, conservation status, I think, is also something worth mentioning.
Yeah, it's so matted flax lily. So this plant here, Nastella Nissiana, it's critically endangered. It's oftentimes found only growing in volcanic plain sort of grasslands and grassy woodlands. My understanding is it's also found in like eastern Melbourne in more sandy sort of environments. But the reality is environmental destruction, so the clearing that's happened over so long, has caused it to become critically endangered. So my understanding is there's only 3,000 plants left in the wild. And of course, that's under threat from grazing, from improper sort of burning regimes. So this is probably a great example to show all the grasses around. If we did not burn regularly, this plant would get completely swamped out. And also the big one, which is climate change. That's probably something we haven't even mentioned yet. Like lack of water, extreme heat, that's going to knock out more and more of those 3,000 plants over time. Yeah, so it's a very, very special plant. You can buy it at native nurseries. There's some available at, say, Skink or Vink in Melbourne. There's a fair bit in this grassland, which is what makes it even more special, I think, this is one of several endangered plants that we actually find throughout. And hopefully we can find some more with bigger flowers.
There's quite a few around here.
Yeah,
and I wonder as well, I think that habitat fragmentation might be something that's also impacted matted flax lily. It has a really specific relationship with blue-banded bees. So it's buzz-pollinated. So the blue-banded bees, they lodge themselves in these yellow anthers and they vibrate their wings, and that knocks the pollen out. blue banded bees have this really, I think their foraging range is only 300 meters or so. So what that means for Dianella is that there is only a particular species that does pollinate it, and the plants need to be within 300 meters of each other for them to actually reproduce in the wild. So yeah, really special, fascinating, and rare plant.
Yeah, that's right. So we haven't even found the chocolate lily yet. Hopefully we can.
While you guys are finding that, I might just jump in, and Ange was just wanting clarification on the kangaroo situation, and I just googled it, Ange, to answer your question properly. But so the kangaroos have been there for a while. They've persisted actually, and they use like suburban streets and stuff to cross over into the Bubba, Jinanang and Faulkner, and to kind of move around through different habitats. So yeah, they're pretty urban roos, which is interesting.
Cool. So we've managed to find one of the chocolate lilies, or Arthropodium strictum. It's also called, I think, Dicopogon strictum now. But I wouldn't worry about the botanical name. Just remember chocolate lily. That's probably the most important thing. So chocolate lily is a lily, as we mentioned. So it's very closely related to the Dianella, which we can also see very closely by. It's really a small, what we call a tufted graminoid. So it's a herbaceous plant with these beautiful, hopefully you can see that.
Yeah.
These beautiful purple flowers that are chocolate scented. And they give way to these really nice, like sort of little green berries, and inside are black seeds. So chocolate lilies occur basically all over the Victorian volcanic plain. They tend to be in sort of like more wetter areas. So you don't really tend to find it in the far west of Melbourne on the grassland reserves, like say in like St Albans or Derrimut, out sort of near the Werribee Way. It's perennial, so although it's there all year, it actually dies off over the summer months when it's too hot. So much like orchids or bulbs, garlic, etc., it actually dies down to a subterranean tuber, which is quite large. It's about the size of your thumb, and we can actually see it sort of starting to die off there. So we've got a lot of this sort of dead foliage. However, when in the beginning of winter, or sorry, midwinter rather, when you come through the grassland, it's remarkable how many you see. They're these beautiful sort of rich green tufts. And then they start putting up these stalks pretty early. So it's a good sign that this is still flowering here. This probably means that there's still a lot of moisture. There's a lot of, thanks to the winter rains, there's a lot of moisture still in the soil, so they can really pump out these seed heads and put out lots of seeds. So it's a really important, it is an important indigenous food plant, along with many other plants that used to be far more widespread over the Victorian volcanic plain. So those tuberous plants such as orchids, and of course the big one, Microceras, or Microceras scipidra, which is also known as yam daisy, or the indigenous name Maribyrnong. Many of you would probably know this from a lot of research from Bruce Pathko's book Dark Emu, or through a lot of research that's been all over the ABC, for example, Guardian. It was a critical indigenous food plant that had very, very high nutritional value. It was a really important part of a really important carbohydrate source. And that used to be very widespread in more lower sort of what we call gilgais, or wetter areas of grasslands, where you find more tussock grass and kangaroo grass and less of the ostrastipa. The Maribyrnong has a large tuber that, much like the chocolate lily, puts up growth and then creates a new tuber at the end of its lifespan. So indigenous people would dig this up. They would leave the new tuber, is my understanding, and then take the big chunky one for food. So that way they weren't just completely ravaging the landscape, reducing the numbers of Maribyrnong. They were actually leaving it there in what I think many would argue, and we can now say it was a really important form of agriculture, regenerative agriculture in a very significant landscape where you can't just take and take and take, you have to manage things in equal number. So unfortunately, through the grazing, through land development, through clearing, all that stuff that we've talked about, we really, really don't find it in many places at all on the Merri Creek. My understanding is there's within the Merri Creek catchment itself, so very far up north from Wallen, all the way down to the confluence in Abbotsford there at Dights Falls. There's only 2 places where Microceras or yam daisy still grows. There's only a handful of plants left. Fortunately, we've collected seed from them, we propagated them, and we've replanted them. We've also had a number of projects where those yam daisies have been seed and tubers have been given to people. There's the MECAG program, I believe it's called, in Coburg, where they on the Merri, they actually have a beautiful bush plot where they grow it. And that's part of like a really important path forward, which is revitalizing and rejuvenating these important cultural plants and really giving them the respect they deserve and trying to spread both the knowledge of how important they are, but then also physically reintroduce them to the grasslands again. So reintroducing that one plant from a very small genetic source is a momentous undertaking. And it's something that is going to be very difficult, but as we'll talk about later, it's really something that we can all get involved with, I think. Yeah, so we'll go look at some other plants. We've actually got some direct seeding plots, so some experimental plots where we've actually direct seeded wildflowers. So we've scarred the top of the ground. They're nearby. Let's go see if we can find them. Might be a bit hard in the grass.
We'll see what we can see. There's some more beautiful patches of trichorhini. There's a lot of it growing around here at Ngarri at the moment, if you do want to come out and have a look.
Yeah, I think with all the rain this year, it's a pretty incredible year for wildflowers and things. So now that they're allowed out to explore, it's a good time.
Absolutely. I'll just point out some things here if anyone does come and they're interested. Here we've got some Asperula concerta, which is common woodruff. So that's just a really small trailing little herb that we find a lot in remnant areas along the Merri Creek. And it does tend to dry out in summer once it gets a bit warmer. So now is a good time to also check that one out. It might not be here when the weather gets a bit warmer.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good plant to really point out, that not every plant in grasslands and native plants across the continent are always going to be these amazing, beautiful, floriferous, bright sort of things that we see, especially in people's gardens. It's also these important plants that really, they're very small, but they do contribute very widely to like biodiversity numbers of how many different unique plants that we have in these landscapes. So I think anybody would probably just walk over that and not really think much of it. But it's important, especially in the intertussock space that Soph was talking about, gilguys, etc., that we have a look. We look very closely because there's a completely different microcosm going on down here of plants and lichens and liverworts. It also forms a really what we call the cryptogamic crust, which is a very complicated word, but it basically means this top surface of soil that cracks and swells, and then you can see we have ants crawling all over here. But we get the mossins, lichens, liverworts, and of course fungi, which form a really invisible sort of part of the grassland. They really affect the way, and although there's not really a lot of research into this in grasslands, but how it affects plants recruiting or basically seeding and then germinating new plants, and also affecting birds and like animals and all sorts of stuff. So when you are here, please get down low and have a look. You never know what you could find.
Absolutely. I think as well, there are a lot of things in grassland, or plains grasslands, where there's a lot of ecological relationships that we don't understand, and there is a lot of knowledge that has been lost. So they're these very fascinating places.
So we've got a few of our feeding plots around here, but unfortunately they're not looking too good at the moment.
Do you want to explain the process of the seed plots and why we've trying them out?
Yeah, so we'll try and find one, but I will mention, as Sarah said, like why are we doing the seed plots? So revegetation, which is one of the main things that MCMC does, is basically reintroducing plants to a landscape that is otherwise damaged or been edited or changed. And grasslands are no different. So just like all the environments that we see in Brunswick and Northcote along the creek, where we've both the Friends of Merri Creek and MCMC have done these huge plantings, we also introduce those plants back to grassland. So usually that's in the form of tube stock, which you've probably seen. They're small sort of black tubes. We'll dig a hole, plant it, cover it with soil, and water it in. However, for a lot of plants, that's not how they generally naturally recruit, or which that what I mentioned earlier. So that's basically how they would naturally reproduce. Some plants might do it vegetatively. So if you think of lawn grass, rather than putting out seed, it grows and creeps. And for many plants, they actually need an important trigger for their ability for the seeds both to come up, or they need the right sort of like environmental conditions on the ground. A great example of that is daisies, so Asteraceae daisy families. So that's Maribyrnong, lemon beautyheads, as I mentioned earlier. What else do we have in daisies? Chrysocephalum, or common everlasting. These are plants that will spread by very, very fluffy sort of white seeds. So if you think of dandelions or if artichokes, they will spread along in the wind and hit the ground and then germinate. However, they really like and respond to what we call disturbance. And disturbance could be, it's a very, very broad term which matches a number of things, but it oftentimes means very, very fine sort of irritation of the topsoil, the top layer of the ground there. So what we've done in a lot of these plots is we've set up 4 stakes, we've put around some snail guards, and then we've broken up the top layer of soil just with a mattock, so maybe down to a length of 10 centimeters. We've also tried up to, I think, about 15 to really crumble and break up that really hard compacted clay, which really swells and cracks and then becomes these heavy blocks. With that breaking up, you get a really sort of like finer, crumbly structure at the top, and that allows the seed to get in. And then it also allows the most important part of the daisy plant for many daisy species, which is the taproot. So if you think of a carrot is a taproot. It's very long, and they can oftentimes find it, the daisies can find it hard to penetrate through that soil profile. And so by breaking that up in the top, it really allows it to go through those little cracks. So we didn't see it, and hopefully we might have the chance back to walk back towards it. But we have one of those seeding plots of lemon beautyheads, and my knowledge is it was seeded about 8 years ago. And that's a really, really remarkable survival length for that plant, because a lot of the times that we and other bush crews, other regenerative groups across Australia have tried to put in tube stock of those daisies, they don't tend to last long. They just tend to die off after a few years. So it's important, especially with Maribyrnong, for example, if we are introducing it to a grassland, we've got to do it right. We've got to make sure that it's surviving, that it can put up seed, and that it can spread. And if we're continually planting the same way, then we're not going to get good results. And that's important, as Soph mentioned, that there's so many of these relationships that we still yet to understand. And that although we've been studying this for a long time, grasslands still are a bit of a mystery, I think. All right, so let's try and find one of those seeding blocks.
It's a lot easier in summer to find the plots.
The
grass is very high at the moment.
Yeah,
as well,
so I've got what was put in here. I believe this was actually a Dianella plot, but unfortunately I don't have any germination in there yet.
Put a look around.
And so all that protection is for the kangaroos, because the kangaroos are pretty inquisitive. When you plant things, they like to come and have a nibble and pull it up. So we have to put in quite a bit of work to protect stuff from them at times.
Hey everybody, we're taking on a bit of a wild goose chase, but we do really want to find one. I can say anecdotally, when we did do these seeding plots, the grass was maybe only this high, and so I didn't expect it to be this high, and we had to come look for them.
Yeah, we didn't quite anticipate this. While we are walking as well, like you see a lot of these basalt stones scattered along the knolls at Ngarri, and Merri, which is the Woiwurrung name for Merri Creek, means rocky. And these basalt stones that you will see scattered around Ngarri are a really huge part of the grassland. They also provide refuge for a lot of rare plants and also animals that do still persist in these grasslands.
So, unfortunately, it looks like we're not going to be able to find one. But basically those seeding plots are where we've done a lot of the daisies. So we'll do them at different heights in the landscape. So you saw that one up there with the kangaroo protection, that sort of black plastic on it. That's a little bit of a higher spot in the landscape where it's a little bit drier. As opposed to down here, we do have one here. Unfortunately, I can't find it, over there near the fence. And that's a little bit of a wetter part of the landscape. So even that topography of just a few meters elevation can really make a difference in the way that water flows under the soil, not necessarily on top, but the way soil will penetrate up at a higher point, move down, and then across over to that point. So that way we can see where the plant might favor. Can it grow in these sort of higher, more exposed rocky areas, or can it grow further lower down the bottom? So we've got about 10 minutes to go before the end of the presentation, but we'll keep walking through just to show probably one of the more important things that we want to get across with this presentation at Ngarri, which is weeds. So weeds are, of course, a really, really important issue and threat, both to grasslands, but also to various environments and ecological communities across Australia. So much of the grasslands, unfortunately, because they were so heavily developed, because they had
Slashes,
so mowing, moved animals, four-wheel drives, all sorts of different disturbance, like methods of disturbance throughout their history. It's really allowed weeds to make a really heavy sort of impact on grasslands. So we're here in the northwestern block where both you can see just under the trees there, a lot of weeds such as phalaris or canary grass. We also see cocksfoot grass as well. But I'm hoping that we can find what is arguably the worst weed on the Victorian volcanic plains, which is a species of grass. I'm shocked that we actually can't find it. Usually it's everywhere.
I think I may have seen. Here's this.
Here it is. Okay, that's probably.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Here's the culprit.
This tussock grass here, hopefully you can see it in detail, which I think to the naked eye, to anybody would usually look just like any other sort of grass, or a speargrass maybe, because it's very closely related. This plant is called Nastella Nissiana, or Chilean needlegrass. So it's a native of South America. It was brought over here, I believe, in the 50s or 60s in hay bales. So it was either brought over in sheep's wool, accidentally, just in like a wool bale, or it was, literally came across in the wool of live sheep. So Chilean needlegrass is incredibly competitive, and what that means is basically it is very, very hardy both under the ground, so it can survive with very little rain. If you think of Chile, if you think of those sort of desert environments, it's very arid environments with low rainfall, it's really is a survivor. And when it was introduced here, it absolutely exploded. So it began to take over grasslands, both on the edges. It would then, the seeds would get in the fur of kangaroos. It's very easy to get it in your boots or in your socks. Sometimes I get home and I look at my carpet and there's Chilean needle seeds in my room. And so that hardiness both below ground and its ability to spread via animals to put out absolute mammoth amounts of seed in a very short time mean that it is incredibly very difficult to remove, and then also very competitive, as I mentioned. So it outcompetes kangaroo grass, speargrass, Dianella, as we looked at before. A lot of those plants really struggle because they form monocultures, or these single heavy sward. So fortunately, we do have a lot of speargrass and kangaroo grass really managing to hold on in this sort of big corner, but it's difficult to describe the real threat that Chilean needlegrass has on grasslands, in addition to weeds in general. So it's estimated that 1/4 of the biomass, which actually refers to the physical mass of plants within a grassland, 1/4, which is remarkable, is weeds. So what that basically means, 1 in 4 plants, so to speak, is a weed, even though it actually might not look like that when we're walking around. So many grasslands that you'll find throughout the Victorian volcanic plain, all over West, Geelong, etc., they're very heavily weed infested. as people might have heard or read about the Western Grassland Reserve, which was supposed to be one of the state's biggest purchases of grasslands in history, and possibly even in the world as a grassland reserve. It's heavily weed infested. There's hardly any sort of native grass cover left. So yeah, I think that's an important thing to consider. Is it's not just other plants here, it's also the weeds, and it's also up to us to manage them as well. So we do manage that through burning, both cultural burning with Indigenous peoples. We have a very good relationship with Wurundjeri, and we've done another number of cultural burns. And then we also just do general sort of biomass reduction burns out here. So this area was burnt, I think, about 2 years ago. So I think this was one of our first burns, wasn't it?
I have never done a burn at Ngarri.
Oh, right, okay. I think it was about 2 years ago. And so you can see the radical amount of regrowth that's happened, and it's probably almost ready in a few years for another burn. But through burning off that top growth, through burning off all the dead foliage, we can then come in and do very, very careful control. So we can either spray the grasses with selective herbicide without getting a lot of off-target damage onto native grasses. And then we can also come in and easily hand weed them as well. So as you can imagine, removing this whole thing compared to removing it when it's cut down nice and low would be far easier. So yeah.
I think it's also a point that I'd like to raise about a lot of environmental weeds in grasslands is they do really form these dense swards that totally outcompete native vegetation. But they are also linked to changing the hydrology in grasslands. So I think Chilean needlegrass, because it does grow so vigorously and it grows during the cooler months, will outcompete Themata, which grows during warmer months. So Chilean needlegrass is then taking up available water and nutrients that would go to other plants that are active in the grassland during that time. So they are, really, really serious problems.
Yeah, that hydrology I think you mentioned is really important, that to highlight the difference between an age-old continent and an incredibly old ecological community that's grown over thousands of years with such a fragile sort of balance, both between natives and the human impacts as well through Indigenous peoples burning and cultivation. That is incredibly sensitive. And so when you add an incredibly vigorous plant, which through no fault of its own, of course, through being introduced, has a totally different growth pattern. It's a C3, as Soph mentioned, which is cool season. So it tends to grow mainly like a lot in winter and early spring. And then there's C4, which is kangaroo grass. So that's very vigorous in summer. And that's when, by the time Chilean needlegrass is put out at seed, that's when we start to see the actual maturation of kangaroo grass seed on that plant. So that fine balance is difficult in our management practices. How do we consider burning and then trying to save the kangaroo grass? We don't do it in summer because of the conditions around fire, of course. So we need to make sure we do it at the right time when we're not damaging the kangaroo grass as much, and that we are also, we're favoriting that, and then being able to really hit the Chilean and also the other weedy grass species, of course, as well. How about we go over to we can see the difference between the burnt area a little bit further over, I think. So we'll walk through the northern block, the very edge of the northern block now.
Oh, there's a question here.
Yep.
Do residents oppose burns?
Do residents oppose burns? That's a really good question. I think that, Sarah, you might be able to talk more towards this, but I think fortunately in this area where people are living, as you can see, literally meters away, tens of meters away where we've done burns in the past, we've had a really good relationship with talking to them about what fire is, about how it's not something that we should ultimately fear in Australia. It's something that we do have to live with, I'm sure, as we all know. So when we talk about fire here and we talk to the residents around, when we do door knocks before each time we burn, or we drop letters or we email them, we tell them about both the importance of grasslands as an ecological community, which is the most important thing to mention. So we need to tell people, we need to tell our friends and family, etc., and our neighbors that grasslands are really important. That's number one. Number two is that fire is a really important part to maintain that sort of important landscape. And then we also just tell them that it's something we need to do to reduce the risk of even further fire, which is spontaneous and without human intervention. And believe me, it does happen a lot. A number of grasslands out north have had kids lighting cars on fire, which I guess is human intervention. but that causes a runaway fire, which of course is a really, really big risk to communities around. I'm sure people remember in the fires last year in Bundoora in central Melbourne, Plenty Gorge had an out of control fire, and that was very, very close to people's houses as well. So we can educate them on the importance, and also that it is a reduction. It is using a fire now so there's not a worse one in the future.
Absolutely. I think when grasslands are managed as grasslands, they pose much less of a fire risk, especially when they're in peri-urban areas. And there are also a lot of weed species like Phalaris, Toowoomba canary grass, that is actually really flammable. So through actively undertaking weed management and conducting ecological burns, these are actually, the grasslands are in a much better position to not be a fire risk if residents do live in the area.
One thing we tell them is always put your clothes inside, because the amount of smoke that you get after a burn, I can tell you, you stink of smoke when you go home. So it really does walk on for a while. We make sure that, we make sure that people know that they need to put their clothes inside.
Guys, we've just got a couple of minutes till 3. I'm just thinking if we want to fit in some questions as well. We might want to let people know how they can go and explore the grasslands as well.
So hopefully today, everything that we've shown you has really illustrated how important sort of this landscape is, and the importance both of it floristically for animals, for the roos, for the birds, and also as a cultural landscape, more importantly, for Indigenous people and how we maintain it. So this grassland is really not far away. It's in Reservoir. I'm sure many people in metropolitan Melbourne know where that is. For those people elsewhere in, say, Epping, or in the city of Whittlesea, or in Moreland, you all have grasslands within your community. You can probably within a bike ride, or maybe a 20-minute or half an hour drive. I implore everybody, please come and check this out. It is really, really special. So much work has gone into maintaining this, and as I mentioned, 1% of its original growth, it is a really special landscape. You can come through here, you can explore, but you also need to do it respectfully as well. So please don't pick wildflowers, don't annoy the kangaroos.
And don't feed them as well. I'd just like to add on that note,
we do get, there's a lot of people that walk around, maybe they're not familiar with kangaroos and that they need to be left alone. But if you do come through here, just be respectful. So tread carefully, don't pick anything, leave nothing but footprints and take nothing but photos, I believe is the expression. And it's really important to mention that, like I said, with those flowers, there's nothing like actually being in a grassland and looking at something directly. You really feel a very, very powerful connection here once you have knowledge of the way it works, how important that sort of annual life cycle with rain, with fire, with dryness, with human intervention, how important of a very, very holistic ecosystem it is. And that's one thing at Merri Creek and the Friends of Merri Creek that we've strived for decades now, is this activism, this call to arms, protecting grasslands, protecting our green spaces and our environmental areas. And Ngarri is no exception. There's a number of works that have been undertaken here by the Friends of Merri Creek. They've done plantings, they've done weeding, they've done bird surveys, flora surveys, and all that is really, really dependent on people actually turning up and getting involved and having a stake in grasslands as well. So with the threat of climate change, with development, with all sorts of threats on the horizon, it really is our responsibility to protect this super special environment. So I implore people, if you are interested, please join the Friends of Merri Creek. Get involved in volunteering. It doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be every week. It can just be at your leisure. And if we do get enough people out here to both protect grasslands, to protect the Merri Creek corridor and the other grasslands within metropolitan Melbourne, we can actually make a difference and secure this for the future and for our kids. And also just mentioning on kids, it's really important that we pass this information both to people in the next generation, to our neighbors, to our friends, to our family. Many people have no idea that this is even here. Many people don't know the grasslands are actually severely under threat. And through being here, through joining us, you're really making an enormous difference because you're now empowered with that knowledge. And with that knowledge, when you come out here, I think you'll really find that it is truly special and you'll want to protect it as well. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I'll just add. Sorry, we've through the grant as well. We've also developed an app which Dom has put a lot of work into. A story map. So I'm just going to share that link now. So yeah, it's got points of significance marked out on the map so that you can have a little explore around. And I just wanted to add some stuff just on safety as well, just quickly. In the grassland, as Dom and Sophie were talking about, the grass is quite high, which obscures lots of the rocks and things, but also snakes. So always make sure you're wearing sturdy footwear and long pants. There shouldn't really be any issues. And also, please don't take your dog with you. And it also gets very hot in grassland. So make sure you're wearing a hat, sunscreen, and go on a cooler day is probably a good idea. I'm not sure if you guys had anything else to add with that.
Yeah, I think that's everything Sarah mentioned there is really important. It's like when you're out here on a 40-degree day, it's very brutal. So make sure you do bring, as you can see, we've got like full PPE, long sleeve hat, and sunglasses really important, and sunscreen as well, and water. One thing that Sarah mentioned there with snakes is also very important. A lot of people have a very a fear or aversion to snakes. They're more afraid of you than you are of them. So if you do see one, just make sure you move away. Don't try and engage with them in any way. And also these large sort of really thicker parts, you can avoid them as well. So when you're out at Ngarri, when you're out at your local grassland, you can walk in the more open areas, which is oftentimes where you'll find the most wildflowers as well. Yeah, so do you have
Absolutely. No.
Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah.
Safety. Yeah. Please download the app if you're out here.
Yeah, and yeah, if there's any last questions, we're happy to stay a bit longer if anyone wants to ask a question. And if you want to ask, just put your hand up and I can unmute you if you'd prefer just to ask with your voice. But yeah, thank you so much for coming and exploring with us today. Oh, cool. Oh, we had someone from Darebin Council watching. Oh, great. That's great. Yeah, thank you. It's been, it's a really good grant. So we're stoked to be able to do this and get something up and running. Oh, cool. And Andrew's just asking about, are the trees part of the grasslands or were they planted? So I can answer that one quickly. Yeah, so these are acacias. Actually, Dom, if you want to talk about trees in grasslands.
Yeah.
Go for it.
That's a really good question, Ange. I think when we think of grasslands across the world, so we think of the American prairie, or if we think of the tropical grasslands of northern Queensland, or the savanna grasslands in Africa, we usually think of them as grasslands. So we're very bare of trees. But the reality is trees do exist in grasslands. And this is probably a great example. They're definitely not planted. These are blackwoods or Acacia melanoxylon. You find these all over. They grow around metropolitan Melbourne, up into the Dandenongs, where they get up, and Dandenongs Yarra Ranges, where they get up to about 20 to 30 meters tall. But these aren't planted. They're definitely remnant. As you can see, there's a lot of them around, and that's because oftentimes, rather than being individual trees, they're actually part of one tree. It's difficult to say here, but what happens is that probably here we can easily illustrate it. The trees will come up, they'll grow larger, they'll grow bigger, and then through either old age or through fire or through other things, they'll die, as we can see here. So these were probably knocked out in one of our fires, but then all the other little ones tend to come up. These trees also particularly, they're part of the Fabaceae family or the pea family, and that is a family that's very, very driven by fire.
We kind of tend to use fire up in this corner of the grassland to control the acacias. We don't really want them encroaching onto the grassland too much. So we kind of aim to knock out a few of them with the burn just to keep them managed. But the burns also promote their growth. So it's just a cycle.
I think Sarah I could hear just at the tail end of that she mentioned how they get knocked around by fire. Hopefully that became clear.
Yeah.
We also find red gums around here as well, not just wattles. But yeah, the reality is fires tend to allow grasslands to stop being dominated by trees. So they'll come through, they'll knock out very small seedlings, and that's why we don't find larger trees sort of occupying grasslands and becoming a sort of more treed community.
You do also have, I guess there's a lot of different geological things going on in plains grasslands. So you'll find that some trees and shrubs also tend to occur more on sort of knolls and rocky areas where the soils are a bit shallower and also drain a little bit better. So yeah, grasslands are not just all grass.
Yeah. One of the things to mention on that as well is with those soils, the reason grasses are so dominant is, especially kangaroo grass, is because they have really fibrous root systems, and it's far easier for them to penetrate that really, really tough compacted clay. And that their below ground biomass is very, very difficult to kind of demonstrate, of course, but that's where majority of the biomass is. The majority of the plant weight is actually in those really extensive below ground root systems. They also sequester a lot of carbon, and that domination of both below ground and above ground just really stops a lot of trees from being able to take root, combined with fire, of course. Yeah, so Andrew, I hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions there, Sarah?
I think we're all good. Yeah, if anyone wants to chuck their hand up and unmute, I'm happy to go with that. Otherwise, we might be able to wrap up. I'll just give it another minute for anyone. The birds sound nice out there as well.
The birds and the cranes in the background in the building.
I think, yeah, there's a note here. Very comprehensive. I think that's correct, you guys. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and just right out of your heads. It's incredible. Yeah, I've been amazed. And yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, if anyone does have any extra questions once you're having a mull around and thinking about the grasslands, feel free to get in contact. Just send an email to the admin at Merri Creek. And we can answer anything that you guys have or try and provide more information. There's also a wealth of information on the Merri Creek website as well. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming along on your Saturday. And thanks to Sophie and Dom, and again to Darebin Council for the funding.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Come out and check out the grassland as soon as you can.